commercial-free Catholic Charismatic channel.
He's strengthening the faith of so many people.
To promote the gift of church teaching. Dedicated for the new evangelization.
God's blessings on your work. May God bless and prosper you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.
Blessings to all of you. My name is Father Pete Jankowski. I'm the pastor of St. Patrick's Church in Joliet, Illinois. Once again, I am here on my third episode of Stories of the Faith, situations of encountering people of God's grace that have really inspired me in my life. And this is really a nice setting to do it. We are right here in the McHenry Dam area, and we're right by the river, and we've got this beautiful scenery, and the people who are doing the Shalom World producing have refused to allow me to stand next to a tree stump, which I really wanted to do, because I think tree stumps are more appropriate for my life than these beautiful trees. Sometimes you're like the tree, and sometimes you're like the stump. And in my experience in the faith, I need to have things that are accessible to me, something that is at my level. We talk about, if you want to see God in the scriptures, they always talk about the mountains. We're talking about the heights. But sometimes, as like Bishop Bob Barron would tell us, sometimes it has to be more like a mustard bush, a mustard tree. That's something that we can relate to. For me, it's a stump. It's a stump because, first of all, trees have rings, and so do I. But more importantly, trees sometimes have to be cut down, and trees sometimes have their struggles in life. And I've learned in my own faith life that sometimes it's the times that I have fallen, the times that I have gone low, is the times that I've really learned about God's love, because sometimes we take God for granted and we don't really understand God as well as we should until we hit those low points in life. What is the Footprints prayer? It's at our lowest times that Jesus carries us, and that's when we notice that there's only one set of footprints in the sand, that God is always with us on this journey. And I was recalling in the first book that I wrote, Stories of the Journey, in the preface of that book, I tell a story about how during one of the lowest points of my life, someone really picked me up and showed me the face of God. It was around 1988, 1987. I was driving back and forth here from Illinois to Washington, D.C., studying philosophy at the Catholic University of America. At the time, I was driving back and forth in a 1971 Volkswagen Super Beetle with no floor in the car, that I had to take a piece of sheet metal and rivet the floor with it. And the engine was in the back of the car, and I had to install little fans so I had a little bit of ventilation in the car. And I thought I was a pretty good mechanic at the time. Because I did not have the greatest of resources, I learned how to become an engineer, how to become an auto mechanic. I used to thrill myself taking the engine out of the car, bringing it up to my dorm room at the seminary, fixing the car up, doing everything that was necessary to get it tuned up, and then carrying the engine back to the car down on the first floor, where I'd put it back in my Volkswagen, ready for my upcoming trips. There was one particular winter where I had gone through my routine. I changed the oil, I did the tune-up on the car. I was ready to go for my 14-hour drive from Washington, D.C. back to Sandwich, Illinois, when I had realized that something was terribly wrong with my car the minute I started leaving the house, the seminary. I had realized that in this particular car, there is a charging cable that attaches to the battery of the car, and that is the cable that allows the energy from the battery to fuel the car to allow it to go. Unbeknownst to me, when I had put the engine back in the car, I forgot to secure the battery cable to the engine. And so the battery cable was flapping loose, and I didn't realize that. when I got into my car, now I like to drive in the middle of the night. When I was in the seminary, I used to drive at starting like 10 o'clock at night, so I would get home about 12 noon. And I always found driving at night to be one of the most peaceful times in my life. It gave me a time for reflection, gave me a time to prayer. I've always said that if I wasn't a priest, I'd want to work at a donut shop, because in a donut shop, you get to stay up all night and you get to be with nice, calm, quiet evening. And to be honest with you, there's no better taste in the world than a fresh donut out of the fryer at 2 o'clock in the morning. I used to work at a donut shop, so I know that. So I got the car all ready to go at 10 o'clock at night. I got in the car, I had packed it, ready for the long trip. And as soon as I left the seminary, I knew immediately something was wrong, because there was a light that was shining on the dashboard of my car that said battery low. And I knew that wasn't the case because I had just got the battery charged. Everything was ready to go. I knew that in this trip, I was a great auto mechanic. I knew what I was doing. The car was in tip-top shape. So I didn't think I had done anything wrong. So there I go from Washington, D.C., drive through Maryland, go through the Pennsylvania turnpikes and some of the most beautiful mountain regions you're going to ever see. Then I get to Ohio. And I have to tell you, Ohio, God love all the people in Ohio. I love you all. It is the most boring drive you're ever going to have in your car. 4 hours of nothing on the interstate. You're going from one end of the state to the other, and there's nothing to see. But Ohio is the means to the end. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, there I am in Ohio with my little light flashing on the car, and it became ominous. It became ominous. It became scary. You'd see that light going on, and you'd think to yourself, what is wrong with the car? What is the car going to do? But I was the master auto mechanic. I would never do anything wrong. That car was in great condition as far as I was concerned. So I made it all the way through Ohio. I get to the western end of the state. I get to this rest stop. Now, I also have to tell you that this was a major snowstorm that was coming down at the time I was driving. But I didn't care. I love snow. Snow is a great religious symbolism to me. When the snow lays on the ground, it reminds me of how Christ helps us through our sin, that Christ gives us a second chance, that when we go to confession, when we admit our sins, when we ask God for help, we start clean. And I love the image of the white as snow that happens in the scriptures time in and time out. So I'm driving there on the western end of Ohio. I'm about to enter Indiana when my car starts to sputter. Now I'm thinking to myself, maybe my car is out of gas, even though the register on my car seemed to be at full. Maybe it's time to stop at a rest stop. So I go to one of those 24-hour rest stops and I pull in, and as soon as I get to the gas pump, I notice that my car dies on me. Now we're in the middle of a snowstorm. It's in the middle of the night. I'm trying to think to myself, what am I going to do? All of a sudden, there's this gentleman with a beat-up Oldsmobile that pulls up behind me. The man's name was Mark. He pulls up with this beaten Oldsmobile, and he says to me, is there a problem? Can I help you? And I say to Mark, well, my car seems to have died. Is it possible that you could jump my car with your car battery? And he says, no problem, let me help you out. He puts the cables that I have, the battery cables on my battery, his battery, starts my car up. The car seems to be running. This car seems to be doing well. My car is now full of gas and I'm ready to go. And Mark says to me, and I remember this, he says, do you think that maybe I should follow you just to make sure your car is fine? Now, when it's like 2 or 3 in the morning and you're followed by a guy who you don't know, it's kind of an ominous thing. So I said to myself, no, it's fine. I've got it. Everything's okay. No worries. So quickly, I leave the 24-hour rest stop thinking to myself, I better get away as soon as possible. Don't talk to strangers and all that kind of good stuff. I get 2 miles out of the rest stop. My car dies for good. My car is completely dead. The battery no longer has juice in it, and I am stuck in the middle of nowhere at 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of a snowstorm, and I have nowhere to go. I'm sitting in the car, and my thoughts are not good. And I was reflecting on how it would take me about 20 minutes, a half an hour to get back to where I was to ask for help. when all of a sudden, the Oldsmobile man pulls up right behind me. He comes and talks to me. He says, well, what I feared actually happened. Your car has finally died. He says, let's do this. Let's take your battery out of the car. Let's go to the next rest stop. Let's get your battery fully charged, and I'll treat you to dinner. Now, I didn't expect somebody who I'd never met before to treat me in such a kind and caring manner. Mark takes me to the next rest stop. We find a place to charge my car battery. We start having a conversation. Mark starts asking me, tell me your story. So I told him how I was a seminarian in Washington, D.C., how I had been in the seminary since high school and college and then graduate school, how I was thinking about becoming a priest in my life. Mark told me that he was a businessman. He was in sales, and that he had a wife and 2 small children that lived in Maryland, and he too liked to drive at night because it was quiet, it was peaceful. It was a time for him to reflect and think about life. We shared our stories with each other. We finished with our stories. He went to get my car battery. We drove the 20 minutes, half hour back to where my car once was. He puts the car battery in my car and he says, this is not good enough. He says, you know what? I just don't trust your car battery. I think what I would like to do is I would like to follow you all the way home. Now, this is not necessarily kids. Don't do this at home. In fact, kids, don't drive in the middle of the night unless you're absolutely sure that your car is going to run. But what Mark decides to do is he decides to follow me all the way home. And whenever my car battery starts losing its energy, he and I swap car batteries. I take his battery, he takes mine. He follows me all the way home. When I start getting tired, he flashes his lights to make sure I'm still awake. This is a time before we had cell phones, where we had other means of communication. We communicated by hand signals. We communicated by the flashing of lights. We finally make it all the way to Chicago, and he says, you know what? Go to Sandwich, I'll follow you home. So I get all the way to Sandwich, Illinois, to where I live. He pulls up in my dad's house. And I am just amazed at someone who had that kind of heart, who I had never met before, would do something like this for me. Obviously, this was the grace of God that got me back home. Now, at the time, I really didn't have many resources. My father, my mom wanted to give Mark some financial compensation. Mark wouldn't take anything. What he said to me, which is the catalyst for my ministry in life, is he said to me, I just did this so I could take a story and bring it back home to my family. To me, that means everything. It means everything because it reminds me how God speaks to me in so many people through so many different ways. And I also realized that it is through my weakness that I find strength. I find strength in others who teach me the way of God when sometimes I can't find it myself. And that's happened so many times during my life. It's so important to turn to people who show you the face of God through struggles. And I came to realize that as weak as I am and as sinful as I am at times in my life, I realized that if I can do the same thing for others, if I had that Spirit of God as Mark had at that moment, if I could offer it to others, then maybe this message would not go in vain. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was ill or in prison and you visited me. And the just would then say, when did I see you hungry or thirsty or naked or ill or imprisoned? And then the righteous would say, if you've done it for the least of my brothers, you've done it for me. That stuck with me. And that's one of the reasons I like working at Stateville Prison, because it reminds me that if I can offer God's grace to those who struggle the most, then maybe God will do the same thing for me. It's important to me. It's important for me to do. I was thinking to myself that when I was at the parish a few years ago, we had this situation. We have a food pantry. We have a food pantry that feeds 300 families a month at our parish. And we had a semi-truck that came to visit us one day, and the semi-truck had 40 cases of fresh chicken in the middle of the summer that they couldn't give to the businesses because there was a damage to one of the boxes, and the businesses wouldn't accept it. And so instead of throwing out the chicken, they decided to donate it, and they knew that we had a food pantry, and they wanted to help us out. Now, I had just taken the start of a nap. Everyone was gone at the parish. It was just me. I received this phone call, and I knew that later in the day I would have to hear confessions. But I went down and met the truck driver in my sweats and my scrubs, and I helped him unload 40 cases of fresh chicken that we would donate to the poor. And I remember needing help for this because I couldn't do it myself and I didn't have a place to put all this chicken. We have institutional refrigerators down in our basement for our food pantry, but we didn't have enough room. So we ended up taking the cases of chicken, we put it in my car, we put it in trucks. It dawned on me by the time that all of this was over, my entire person was saturated in fresh chicken juice in the middle of the summer. I smelled like a hen house. But I also realized that we had so much chicken that we were able to go to a daybreak shelter and a Morning Star mission, and we were able to donate all this produce for all these people who were hungry. And I remember this when we do these kind of things. I also remember sitting in the confessional soaked in chicken juice hearing confessions. It probably wasn't the greatest place to be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I also remember that during these times when people were receiving this produce, I remember doing all this work, and a woman came up to me and she was staring at me. She was staring at me, and I kind of got unnerved a little bit, and I looked at her and I said to her, is everything all right? Is there something I can do for you? And she said, no, I just wanted to see what the face of God looked like. And I said to her, you might want to look a little bit farther if you're looking for the face of God. I'm not sure I'm it. But I understood her sentiment, because the whole idea of passing it forward, paying it forward, taking this grace that God has given you and offering it to people who are in need. People have done it for me so often in my life, for me to do it for others, for me to take that gospel message and share it with other people is a story that I hold close to my heart. I hope that this is an inspiration for all of us to do the same in whatever families, whatever communities we serve, to invest ourselves in the parish life, to go out and feed the hungry, to take care of those who are homeless, to take care of those who are in need of God's grace. And so I offer this prayer for St. Francis in this beautiful setting. St. Francis, who was so attached to nature. I think it would be most appropriate to conclude this particular talk with this particular episode with the prayer of St. Francis, to remind ourselves that we need people's love. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. When there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Thank you, Mark, for that example of faith. May we continue to offer this faith to the people that we meet. This is our prayer.
Really with pleasure, through the intercession of our Mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary, may God bless us and keep us constantly under His blessing, He who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.